Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. So glad you're tuning into our podcast today. My email address is jason@sportspectrum.com. If you'd like to reach me, any thoughts, any guest ideas, any comments about today's guest, Dean Inserra, you can reach me via my email, jason@sportspectrum.com. And we are presented today by Water Mission, fighting the global water crisis. Right now, they are working to stop the global spread of COVID-19 by providing urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions to refugee settlements and other vulnerable communities. Water Mission does such great work. I want to invite you to pray with them and learn more about the great work they're doing by checking out their website, watermission.org, watermission.org. We are also presented today by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world, and a chance for you to team up with professional athletes and compassion for children in poverty. Nearly 70,000 children left without a sponsor through Compassion because of COVID-19. Your chance to help put a dent in that and release a child from poverty, filling a seat toward a year of needed funding. Check it out at compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup. Today on Sports Spectrum, we welcome Dean Inserra. He is an author and a pastor, the founding lead pastor of City Church in Tallahassee, Florida, and the author, his first book released in 2019 called The Unsaved Christian, Reaching Cultural Christianity with the Gospel. That title just makes my eyes get big right away. The Unsaved Christian. That is the fear for many of us as believers, that we are truly sold out for Jesus and have put our faith and trust in him. We're not just going through the motions. We're not just living this lukewarm life as a believer. Are we even really going to heaven? That's where Dean goes in his book, The Unsaved Christian, Reaching Cultural Christianity. Such a dangerous place to be in terms of cultural Christianity. We talk about that. We also talk about his sports love for the Patriots, for Tom Brady, for the Miami Hurricanes. Remember, Dean is in Tallahassee, Florida, Florida State country, but he loves him some Miami Hurricanes. We talk about all of that and more here today on the show. Take a listen to Dean Inserra on Sports Spectrum. Dean Inserra, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be with you. Excited to talk today with you.
Same here. We can talk all day about, the faith aspect of things, but I know you're a huge sports fan, so we'll try to inject a lot more sports maybe than you'd normally do in an interview.
Sounds good to me. That's great.
So let's just start there. How about we start with where you are? You are in Tallahassee, Florida, which is not far from Tampa, Florida, and the team that you are a diehard fan of no longer has the quarterback that was there for 20 years, and he's now a couple hours south of where you are, quarterbacking for the Buccaneers. How are you holding up?
I'm still going to believe it when I see it. And then they signed Gronk. It's like, what is happening here?
I know.
So it's going to be interesting. Here's the thing with quarterbacks, like legendary quarterbacks leaving their team. It just rarely ends well.
Yes.
I mean, you look back at, Joe Namath with the Rams, and Unitas left to the Chargers, and Montana did okay with the Chiefs, but Favre, and it just Manning couldn't barely throw a pass. Still won a Super Bowl, but with the Broncos, yeah. But it just doesn't end well. So I'm just nervous about that. I just don't want to see him not at the top of his game. But I'm going to do a 2-year rental of the Bucs if he's there. I'll still be a Patriots fan, but I'll definitely be fully invested in watching the Bucs because of Brady. I mean, how can I not be? But
that's fair.
Weird. It's been weird, man. It's just a weird deal. But again, that's how it works. And I really wish he would have retired after the Super Bowl 2 years ago. But who am I to tell him that?
Right. So, I mean, listen, if you can still get $25 million a year and still be at the top of your game, again, we'll see how he is in Tampa. But even in a quote unquote down year in his final year with New England, they won the division and he had a pretty good year. I mean, yes, there were signs that he's 40 years old, but he's still pretty good.
Yeah, and I might get some pushback for this, but despite being a defensive genius, I think some of Belichick's stubbornness has cost Brady some rings. I think there's some missing rings I think he could have seriously have had 9 if he'd had some talent around him on offense.
Yeah, that's fair. He always
so he's going to actually have some weapons this year, but he's going to be 43 years old with those weapons. So we'll see how it goes.
Listen, I mean, who are we to ever doubt Brady? We'll start there, right? But he's doing something that nobody has ever done in the history of the league, that is trying to be great at the age that he's at. He'll be 43 in August, I believe, is around where his birthday is. And the fact that he's going to be 43, I think Favre, even in his second to last year in Minnesota, where he had one of his best seasons, was his 39 into 40 season. Mm-hmm. And I don't think even what you look at Brady winning a Super Bowl 2 years ago, nobody had ever won a Super Bowl at that age. He's in unprecedented, uncharted waters here at 43 to try and be even remotely good, not just great, but if he's even like average, he's better than any quarterback ever at the age that he was at.
Oh, yeah. And I would argue he's still in the top 25% of the quarterbacks in the NFL right now, at that age. Again, he's not Russell Wilson. He's not Rodgers right now. He's not Mahomes, but he's still a quality starter in the NFL at that age. It's incredible.
It is. It really is. Now, I also reading your Twitter bio, it says you're a certified football and baseball uniform expert.
Yes.
I consider myself a little bit of a uniform expert too. I'm curious, what makes you an expert in terms of what? Like, are you just fascinated by the different uniforms?
Well, it's a self-proclaimed fact for all of our listeners out there. Of course.
We all have those.
I've always been into uniforms. This goes back to when I was a kid. My best buddy growing up and I were ridiculous about uniforms. When we played on our all-star team when we were 12 years old, we went to the park president of our baseball team and protested our all-star uniforms.
Wow.
Because we just did not like the look. We were devastated. We didn't have full pinstripes, only had pinstripe pants. And to this day, he and I and his brother are in a group text critiquing uniforms all the time. So I have very strong opinions on uniforms when it comes to football and baseball, especially. Are
you a fan of the new Buccaneers uniforms? We'll start there first.
They're better than they were, but not really. I'd much rather have the old white hat, with the logo, with the pirate logo. I would much rather have that. I'm really into white helmets. Mm-hmm. I don't want my helmets too fancy. And I don't like a lot going on. Like Oregon's uniforms, give me pains in my stomach. I feel it in my bones how much I don't like those. So
about the story, right? I think it's no NFL team has ever won a Super Bowl with white helmets. I think that's the thing. Do you know about that?
Wow. I'm racking it through my brain right now, and I can't think of one on top of my head. Colts.
Because
the Colts.
The Colts would be the only one.
Comes to mind.
Yes, because for the Titans, I think it was, my wife's a Titans fan, and they switched their helmets now. They're blue, or the whatever color off dark blue that it is. And they wore white helmets for the first, whatever it was, 20 years of their existence. And they were in one Super Bowl and didn't win it. And I think the Colts might be the only.
I got Jets in Super Bowl III in my mind. And the Colts is all, and that should never happen. What a disgrace that they lost the AFL Jets. That's ridiculous.
Does that even count? Yes, I guess it counts.
That's all I can think of. That's interesting. Of all the Super Bowls, that's all I got in my mind of those two teams.
Right? Exactly. Yep. So baseball uniforms, if I'm asking you your favorite baseball uniform, maybe you have a favorite team. We haven't even talked about your baseball love or anything like that, but is there a uniform that you're like, that's the uniform, whether it's a regular uniform or a throwback or, an alternative? Do you got one?
I love when the A's wear their green tops.
Yes.
I mean, those are just sharp. Those just great uniforms. And then what San Diego's been doing lately, I'm glad they've finally gone away from that navy blue as much and are embracing that brown and that yellow. I know it sounds gross to me first hear that, but they've done a really good job with that. So I think Padres' newer look is strong.
Do you have a baseball team?
I do. I like the Cubs because I just grew up on WGN.
Yeah.
And I come home and all my friends were Braves, TBS people, so it had to be different. So I was Cubs. They were terrible. That's kind of Sandberg, Grace, Dawson sort of era. But now as a pastor, we have a lot of athletes who have come to our church over the years while they're at Florida State and some who are still involved. So we have several Major League Baseball players over the years who have come out of our church family. So now I more follow where our guys are. But I'm very much, I'm an every night of the week when, have the game on before I go to bed kind of guy. That's my favorite sport.
So this interview is going to run, I think, in sometime in late June, early July. We're taping this just so people know in late May. So sports has not resumed yet. Has this been, you're a man of faith and you're a pastor leading a large church, but have you been struggling here these last few months with no sports? I know I have.
Oh, it's been awful.
Right?
I think I miss it so much. And it's easy to think of it as an idolatry thing. I'm trying to be self-aware. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a great community builder and it's a conversation starter. And it's just a fun thing to have for us. Can we live without it? Yes, we've proven that. That's where the idol conversation would come in, right? Like we can live without it, but it's just so much more fun with it. It's just such a fun conversation piece. I mean, you can not even know someone. I mean, when you and I first got on, before we even went on the air, when we first started talking before we hit record, we never met in person before. We started talking sports immediately and had a bond, right? It's just such a fun community. I think God, I'm not trying to over spiritualize it. I think it's like a gift from God to give us this fun thing to be able to enjoy together and bond over and just, I miss it a lot. So I can't wait for it to come back.
There's so many parallels too when you think of what the church should look like. It's community. It's uniting together for a common cause. You know, you get the over spiritualized or super spiritual people that will say, "Hey, if you come to church, you got to clap as loud as you would on a Sunday when you're watching your sports team." And I'm like, I get what you're trying to say, but there are a lot of parallels. When you go and you watch a game, you're going to watch a Patriots game, or this year maybe you go and watch a Buccaneers game. You're all of a sudden united with all these people from different backgrounds who believe differently, think differently, look differently, act differently, and yet you're all high-fiving in common, and this unity exists. Isn't that sort of a parallel for what the church could look like and should look like?
Well, also, yeah, definitely. And dealing with failure, right? I mean, and loss and how you overcome that. And definitely. I think there's some really neat parallels that are there. In terms of how we should clap the same, I think that's kind of, that a lot of that's cultural, so you never want to tell us that I do hear people say that. You're right.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely things there about just what community looks like. And here's the thing about us as people of faith, we have so much more to be united over, so we can be united over, a football team, how much more which is great and fun, but how much more do we have to be united over with Christ, which is just really, really neat to think about.
D.Min Inserra is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. So you didn't end up in sports; you end up in ministry as a pastor. How does that happen? How does D.Min Inserra? I did read that you had this vision or this thought when you were a senior that you were going to start a church in Tallahassee, and you've done that. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm really thankful for that. I'm one of those stories where if you asked me what I want to be when I grew up, when I was in high school, I would have told you be a pastor in Tallahassee because I wanted to reach my friends. I was someone who went to church growing up, believed in God, thought I was a good person. If you'd have asked me, came from a good family by every definition of how we would view a good family in our culture today. And but I thought I was a Christian. And my reason for believing so really had nothing to do with Jesus. And it was more because I had this sort of generic, vague belief in God and wasn't of another religion. Like I wasn't an atheist, or I wasn't Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu. So therefore, in my eyes, I was a Christian. And I heard the gospel for the first time ever at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes retreat when I was 13 years old. And even though I went to church every Sunday, I could have told you about David and Goliath. I probably could have named some of the 10 Commandments, and I knew some basic Bible stories. I never had anyone actually tell me I was a sinner in need of a savior. And I heard that for the first time that day and gave my life to Christ. I had a coach lead me to Christ. They gave like an invitation where people walk forward to have a chance to accept the Lord. I'd never seen one of those before. I thought it was weird, and it kind of freaked me out. And there's different ways to do that in different cultures that express a kind of coming to faith differently in terms of the process. But I heard the gospel that day, and I had a chance to trust in the Lord. And I have been as Eugene Peterson says, a long, slow obedience in the same direction ever since, trying to follow Christ well through ups and downs of just my own sin and overcoming it by the power of Jesus. But from there, a fire just sparked in me of knowing that so many of my friends in my community were in the same boat I was. They were cultural Christians. And by that, I meant that they were people that their reasons for believing they are Christians are simply cultural, not convictional. And when I read the scriptures, that's not a saving faith. I don't think I'm the judge of who's a Christian and who's not, nor do I want to be. But the Bible is. The Bible makes it clear there's a lot of people who think they are that aren't. And we got to make sure we're clear on what the gospel is and what it is not. And that's become one of the passions of my life ever since then.
Quick break from our conversation with D.Min Inserra to tell you a little bit more about our sponsors today. Water Mission, a nonprofit Christian engineering ministry that fights the global water crisis with safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions in developing countries and disaster areas. The organization has served more than 5 million people in 56 countries, building safe water solutions that break through the global water crisis. They're motivated by their faith in Jesus Christ, the living water, providing safe, sustainable, safe water solutions through a Christian worldview perspective. And man, they're doing such great work. Listen to these statistics updated right before COVID-19 hit. Safe water and sanitation projects built more than 2,700. More than 5 million people provided access to safe water. More than 155,000 people provided access to adequate sanitation. This is a real problem across the world, and Water Mission is putting a dent in that problem by fighting the global water crisis. Check them out at watermission.org to get involved. Watermission.org. We're also presented today by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And right now, Compassion and some of our pro athlete friends have teamed up to respond to 70,000 children, almost 70,000 children being left without a sponsor with Compassion because of COVID-19. That is the capacity of an average NFL stadium. So our pro athlete friends are teaming up to help fill this stadium, and you can join in that as well, donating to help children through the critical next 12 months, every donation helping to fill a seat toward a year of needed funding. You can go to the website, compassion.com/teamup, compassion.com/teamup. Help fill the seat, man. Share that with your friends, and let's get these kids sponsored in Jesus' name. Again, compassion.com/teamup. Team up with pro athletes and compassion for children in poverty. Now back to our conversation with Dean Inserra, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. What kind of growing pains were there early on? I don't remember reading or what age or what moment in your life that you start this church, but there had to be some growing pains. Anytime you start a church, I know a lot of people who've planted churches and began churches, and some have had great success. The first service, we had 1,000 people and we only grew from there. And I'm thinking, man, that's not like a lot of churches and people that I talk to, but what was that like for you, the growing pains early on and getting this thing off the ground?
I was 26, so I'm sure I had a lot of immaturities looking back that wasn't self-aware of, that people gave me a lot of grace concerning. I don't know if I even could have or should have been leading at that time. I'm thankful God gave me the chance to, and that he really is bigger than me, and that's not cliche. It's evidence, of what's happened. Also, nothing established. There's just no legacy of anything. So in terms of financially to just leadership, there's just none of that. So that makes things complicated. There's just zero foundation to build on. But the foundation you do have to build on as a church planner is the scriptures, right? And God's plan for the church. So we were just some excited young people that wanted to reach our friends. And I think just the lack of establishment, it sounds like it could be a good thing, but it can really be hard. When you just don't have any of that just mature legacy, proven leadership as a church. You just have to overcome a lot through that. But God's been good to us, put a lot of good people into our path, and had folks who are willing to sell out to it, which I'm really thankful for. But just that lack of established anything is a real hurdle for church planters.
When people find out you're a Miami Hurricanes fan in Florida State country, how's that go over? I have to imagine that's not easy.
That's a good question. We have a lot of Florida State athletes and coaches at our church and have over the years, and including the president of Florida State University speaks at our church about every year. He'll come and be interviewed, and so we do a lot of stuff at Florida State. So my kids, I have 3 kids. My boys are 4th generation Miami Hurricane season ticket holders. Okay. We've had Miami Hurricane season tickets since 1956. My grandfather's first ever game, it was in the Orange Bowl, was a 6-6 tie versus Georgia. Oh. I said, you went back?
Right? Come on now.
And he moved down from Pennsylvania at the time. South Florida was providing a lot of jobs. It kind of was hopping at the time. Kind of new place to be. And he's a big sports guy. And that was the local. There's no Dolphins back then. It was the Hurricanes. Even though they weren't very good, he went to go see them and became this diehard fan ever since. I remember as a kid, my dad going to away games, to see the Canes play. Now I do the exact same thing with my family. So I work on Sundays. Mm-hmm. If I didn't work on Sundays, we would go to every home game.
Take that trip down.
We make a couple a year, and it's fun. I got to be careful because, again, people take college football very seriously. People know I'm a Miami fan, but I have to sort of be careful. We're really connected to Florida State baseball. Florida State baseball hates Miami. I mean, yes. It's worse than football, their feelings towards. Because football, they hate Miami too. They really hate the Gators. Florida State baseball, hates. Coach Martin and Coach Morris did not like each other. They hate. So I got to be super careful with that. Yeah. So I more just try to casually be smart about my Miami fandom. People know, but we try to be really supportive of our friends who are in Florida State athletics as well. So we have Florida State basketball coaches to go to our church. So we go to their games and we're there and, we're excited about it and that type of thing. But I got to be careful in a town like this for sure.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I was interviewing at a conference 2 years ago with a bunch of football players, and I'm a huge Dallas Cowboy fan. And I found myself interviewing 5 members of the Philadelphia Eagles 2 weeks after they won the Super Bowl when they beat your New England Patriots. And It was, yeah. I mean, put yourself as a big Cowboys fan. Like that was my worst nightmare. Just watching that game was horrible. Being up here in the Northeast, but 2 weeks later, I found myself interviewing 5 members of the Eagles, and I have my arms around them in prayer to close out the interview. And I'm thinking, God, I have no idea what the prayer was. I wasn't paying attention. I wish I was. All I was saying was, God, you got a sense of humor here, pal, because I'm sitting here praying with 5 members of the team that I can't stand. Now, never once, Dean, did I disclose that I was a Cowboys fan to them until after the interview, because I figured that could ruin some things. But I understand you have the gospel as the united factor here, right? So who cares if you're a Hurricanes fan, as long as you're not preaching every week in a Michael Irvin number 47, Hurricanes.
You said that. Right? I've actually worn a Michael Irvin 47.
No, you haven't.
Throwback in a moment. It was a sermon illustration I gave about being in the world, not of it. I talked about how I'm a Miami fan, but I live in Tallahassee. But my loyalties aren't to the team here; they're to somewhere else. However, I live here. Right. So I want to make sure I know the team, that I'm engaged in what's going on, that I show up, I'm a part of things. So we're not removed from the world, right? God calls us to be in it. And I said, but my loyalties with the Miami Hurricanes, and I put on a number 47 Michael Irvin Hurricane throwback. That is so funny you gave that example, because that's exactly literally what happened.
And as people are listening, trust me, this was not discussed beforehand. That was just off the top of my head. That's amazing. Dean, I got to ask you, because you've talked about cultural Christianity and your journey from that to becoming a follower of Jesus, a dedicated follower of Jesus. And this book that you wrote, just the title, The Unsaved Christian, man, that's got to open up a lot of eyes. Tell me about the book, and maybe it's something that's been on your spirit. I mean, it sounds like maybe even since you were in high school, but kind of I know how it is to write a book. It's not easy. And actually saying you're going to write a book, or it's on your heart, and actually doing it are two different things. This book has impacted a lot of people I know, and is how really we connected through social media from a couple people introducing us. Tell me about this book and why you decided to write it, The Unsaved Christian, and the title too.
Yeah, well, writing the next book is going to be different for me, because there's no way it can have the same passion as this, right. Because this has been really the heartbeat of my ministry since I became a pastor, even before I was a pastor. And anyone who knows me or is a part of our church was not surprised at all when that was the topic, because they've heard that message forever and ever. Because I speak to a cultural Christian. I talk to everyone on a Sunday, but they're always on my mind, because for most people in most parts of the country, the dominant religion, or whatever you want, belief system is not atheism. Yeah. Even in secular areas, it's just people that maybe are just secular. There's indifferent, but not that many people, if you look at just data and statistics in the United States of America, identify as atheists. It's growing, but there's just not that many. For most of us, as people that have kind of a generic theism, kind of a spirituality, a big guy upstairs type of mentality, and that's just not Christianity. God is not vague. He's not generic. He defines himself in the scriptures. God has spoken to us. He wants us to know who he is. So the book came about just realizing my own stories. I'm not throwing stones. I'm going, well, this is what I came out of. Someone who had claimed to be a Christian, but not by what the Bible would identify as saving faith. So if you asked me if I was a Christian, I would say yes, but none of those things I would have given an answer to what makes me a Christian were anything that Jesus would qualify as what is needed to have your sins forgiven, right? So that it had nothing to do with Jesus' death in my place as a sinner and his resurrection. I could even argue that the cross and resurrection probably could not have even have happened, and it wouldn't have changed my faith very much. It was just kind of generic theism, go to church, be a good person type of idea. And I realized that is our biggest mission field. So what's happened for a long time is we have seen cultural Christianity as a discipleship issue, or we think, man, they just got to get more serious about their faith, just sort of maybe get it together, get more into following Jesus. And I go, no. This is not a discipleship issue. This is an evangelism issue. These people who actually are not Christians, they don't know the Lord. So we want to help them understand who Jesus is, not fuel this cultural Christianity. And honestly, in sports culture is an area where cultural Christianity really flourishes, unfortunately. So the work there in athletic ministry is critical to help people understand what is Christianity by culture rather than what is Christianity by conviction.
Is there a lot of difference there, or similarities, I should say, in the people who maybe grew up Christian, or say they grew up in a faith-based family? And I always ask the question a lot of times to athletes that we have on this show, when did you make that faith your own? A lot of these guys and gals, or whoever, I'm not even going to pigeonhole anyone, that's what it's really all about, right? The faith of their own and understanding the gospel versus something that you inherited or just believed or just kind of carried with you from what you learned as a 12-year-old.
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. Can the faith be passed down? Absolutely. Can it be inherited? Absolutely not. We have to become Christians ourselves, believe the good news for ourselves. And while, again, I want to thank God for people that maybe had Christian grandparents and parents, that doesn't mean that we are. We have to come to our own realization as sinners and our need for Christ to forgive our sins. And that be what drives our faith, is the work of Christ on our behalf and how we respond to that. But again, in cultural Christianity, it's this generic belief. It's this very also just morality that's really, really offensive to the gospel. I mean, the book of Galatians says that if righteousness can be achieved by keeping the law, then Christ died for nothing.
Yeah.
So I think one of the most popular beliefs out there today is that good people go to heaven.
Oh, very popular.
No one defines what that is, how good is good enough, what is heaven, who's in charge there. It's just kind of this better place that you go to. And it's like, wow, that's such an American belief. It's not a biblical belief. Yeah. Because if good people on their own go to heaven, then again, like Galatians said, then Jesus died for nothing. So I think that's a big part of it. And then the third one is probably that heritage thing, where people will claim to be Christians because they come from a Christian family, or they come from this Catholic family and they were christened, or they went to vacation Bible school at First Baptist and they were 6, or whatever it might be, rather than defining their faith by who Jesus is and what he's done for them.
This is more of a confession for me. And I would never post this or try to offend anyone on social media, because death is a weird thing for a lot of people. We see it whenever a celebrity passes away, or, a famous athlete or somebody like that. You see RIP right away. You see, they're in a better place, all those kind of Americanized things that you hear. And we don't know that. Now, again, we're not the person to judge that either, sure. Thankfully. And there's people, I'm sure, who maybe are in heaven that we didn't think were be, or whatever, from a personal judgment. But I get cringy when I see that, only because I don't know. And people are apparently so certain that they're in a better place, and maybe it's a comfortable thing. I don't even know what I'm asking you here, Dean, other than is that something that you ever think about or see? And certainly I don't think it's my place to respond and say, nope, sorry, they might not be RIPing sure. right now. That's obviously not the best way to handle this either. But is that something that ever creeps up in your mind when you're kind of on social media or just talking to people?
Yeah, in funerals, it often does. I really appreciate you actually bringing that up. I think it's really important. Yeah. And it's not our job to judge, as you said. God's the judge. However, God clearly gives us the standard by which he judges, right. which is the righteousness of Jesus. So I did a funeral a couple of years ago of a 19-year-old boy. So obviously when you hear a 19-year-old boy died, it's tragic. It was rough. Yeah. Awesome family, Christian family. I mean, and I was honored. They asked me to officiate the funeral, and they were very clear in our meeting before the funeral that they want to make sure I was clear on the gospel, that I preached the gospel of Christ that day, because so many friends and family were going to be there who don't know the Lord, and I was okay. And I prayed that, yes, I promise you that will happen. I don't want to preach a sermon if I can't preach the gospel, so let's go. And they had a really nice funeral ceremony. Different friends and family shared about his life, just really great tributes, fantastic things that were said. Things like just the greatest guy, shirt off your back, best friend I ever had. Just really nice tribute to the family and to his life. And it was my turn to come up at the end. I was the closer. I mean, I'm Rivera coming out of the pen, so it was my turn. And I was a little nervous because packed house, and I knew how a funeral is just different. It's different than preaching a normal sermon.
Absolutely.
And I came up there and I first said, one, I want to thank everyone for the thoughts they shared so far about, his name was Heath, about Heath's life. And it's definitely be fine with me sharing this,
sure.
About Heath's life. And I said, I also want you to know that everything they said about Heath was 100% true. All of it was. However, none of those reasons are why Heath is in heaven today. He's in heaven today because Jesus Christ died for his sins, and he believed that in faith and gave his life to Christ for repenting of his sins. That's why he's in heaven today, because of Jesus, not because of himself. So you celebrate the fact that by American standards, he was a really great person. Absolutely was. But that's not what God judges by. So what I want to tell people when it comes to believing their morals are the answer is that we have to change the comparison game. If we compare ourselves to other people, we'll always find someone by American standards a little worse than us, I would hope, right? Find somebody. Or if not, just make sure you're on pace with whatever suburban morality looks like where you live.
That's a sports thing, too. We compare all day long. There's shows on ESPN that exist because of comparison of one athlete to another, Jordan, LeBron, et cetera.
Yeah, top 10 lists, all that. When we compare ourselves to God, we fall short every single time. And all we can do is cry for mercy. And guess what? He provides it for us in his love and in his grace through Jesus. So my plea for athletic ministry is, let's not make God a mascot or a good luck charm or some kind of moral compass. Let's make sure people are clear about who Jesus is. The answer is not us trying harder. And I know that goes against the grain of everything we've been taught in our lives, right? It's you do you and you work hard. And the gospel math is totally different. It's totally different than what we've been taught, and it turns it upside down. And I just worry sometimes that we point people even more, if we're not careful, to a cultural Christian kind of idea of it's about just kind of rah, God's on our team, let's go, I can do all things through Christ, rather than make sure actually people are clear on what the gospel is and what it's not. But what a platform sports gives us to make the good news of Jesus known. It's incredible. I don't have any platform like it.
That's what we're about. I mean, that's what Sports Spectrum's been about for 35 years, is bringing the name of Jesus into the conversation of sports. And I'm just honored to be a part of it. And I agree with you. Sports is such a great place to minister and to talk about the Lord and all he's done for us. Let's close here, Dean. We asked this question to all of our guests here on the show. What's the Lord teaching you right now? It's not a sports question. It's really just a general question we ask all of our guests. Usually they're, athletes or coaches, and maybe you were an athlete at one point, Dean. We didn't even talk about that. Were you an athlete back in the day?
I played football and baseball.
There you go. Yeah. So that's good. So what is God teaching you right now? What are you learning from the Lord, especially during this crazy pandemic time? I can't imagine all the different decisions that pastors have to consider and make with everything that's been going on and when to reopen and all that. So what's the Lord been showing you and teaching you right now?
Well, one, I want to thank all those that are listening that are in athletic ministry. I'm an example of somebody that the Lord used athletic ministry to save. So thank you for the ministry you have. It's real and it's important. I think the Lord is teaching me right now really is what it looks like to get over myself on a daily basis. And Paul wrote, I die daily. And that's one thing to quote. It's another thing to try to live. Yes. And that's a struggle because I have my own opinions on everything that's going on with the coronavirus and how we should approach things. But really, as a pastor and as a believer, I think it's almost more important that I think about what other people, how they feel about it. Just to be transparent, if it was up to me, we would have had church a month ago and been back. And that's just my personal feelings based on people I talk to and doctors I know and things I read. However, a lot of people don't feel that way. So I need to get over myself and my preferences and go, okay, how are other people feeling? Where are they at? What does it look like to give grace and actually consider, Philippians 2, to actually consider others better than myself? Yes. And the only way I can do that is through Christ, right? Is to respond, because on my own, oh my gosh, I'm going to choose my own feelings every single time, right? So I really think I've had to learn how it's easier to talk about self-denial and tweet about it and do verses about it, on a coffee mug or whatever it might be, rather than actually living it. And I think that's the way of the Christian life is downward in terms of our posture. That I might decrease so Christ can increase. Yeah. And that's really, man, I'm telling you, I'm on that journey right now and it's kicking my butt.
Yeah. Well, that's actually the verse that is our ministry is based around. The overarching ministry that owns Sports Spectrum is Pro Athletes Outreach. And we have in our offices in Denver, Colorado is giant John 3:30 with he must increase, we must decrease.
Wow.
The Bible verse. And man, that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. But it shows that following Jesus is not easy. It's not cheap. It's costly. Now our salvation is free.
Yes.
Following Jesus is not. It's costly. Yeah. But our salvation cost him his life, so he's worthy of ours. And I'm trying to figure out how to make that not just what I preach, but how I live. That's
it. I got to ask you real quick. Are you working on book 2? It kind of sounded like you were hinting at that.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. It's I just started it. It's out 2021 with Moody Publishing. Nice. And it's called Getting Over Ourselves.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I think that's a battle I think it's a discipleship issue where Unsaved Christian was an evangelism issue to try to equip people how to reach their cultural Christian friends. This is a discipleship of how to really look into our own hearts.
I love that.
See how oftentimes a me-focused faith that's so popular today is really getting in the way of us being mature Christians without us realizing it.
That's a good title, too. I can't wait for it to come out, and let's get you back on when it does, and we'll talk more about that. Dean and Sarah, thanks so much, my friend. This is great Absolutely. To get to know you, and wish you nothing but the best. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, and feed Ezekiel Elliott all day long. You Cowboys, just give him the ball.
Feed the Zeke.
Thanks for having me.
And many thanks to Dean and Sarah for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. He's got his book, The Unsaved Christian. It's out now. Go pick it up. It's an awesome book, and it really kind of gets to the heart for a lot of people on reaching cultural Christianity with the gospel. I love that he's rooted in the gospel. It's about Jesus. I love that he's rooted in the idea of denying ourselves. He must increase. We must decrease. And he's got a new book. He said he's working for 2021 called Get Over Yourself. I can't wait to read that. And that's going to be an awesome book as well. And the idea of discipleship and evangelism, and love his sports stories. I mean, this guy knows his sports. He could host a podcast for Sports Spectrum. He knows his sports and he loves Jesus, and that's what we're all about. And we're thankful that that's what Dean is all about. Glad that he joined us here today on Sports Spectrum. We're also thankful for our sponsors, Water Mission. You can check them out over at watermission.org as they fight the global water crisis. And of course, Compassion International. Check out their website, compassion.com/teamup, and help fill a stadium and release children from poverty left without a sponsor because of COVID-19. Compassion.com/teamup. We are so grateful that you tuned into today's podcast. Again, my name is Jason Romano. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. And we love you guys. We're so glad you tuned in. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.